Vazhdojmë të jemi këtu në beleg të Deçanit. Kemi marrë një intervistë me kryetaren ose presidenten e Gjykatës Speciale, Ekaterina Trëndafilova.
First of all, I would like to thank you, Ms. Karadaku, I hope I pronounced correctly your name, that you have invited me for this interview, and I would gladly respond to all your questions. And let us start with the first one.
Ka pasur argumente në lidhje me mungesën e jurisdiksionit të dhomave të specializuara dhe, sipas avokatëve mbrojtës të zotit Thaçi, asnjë nga pikat e ngritura në akt akuz nuk ka të bëjë me pretendimet e raportit të Këshillit të Evropës. Ata argumentojnë se dhomat e specializuara u krijuan për të hetuar ato akuza. Si i përgjigjet kësaj Gjykata Speciale?
As a starting point, before I go into the specific question that you have addressed to me, I would like to make a clarification that is very, very important about our two institutions, the Kosovo Specialist Chambers and the Specialist Prosecutor's Office. They are two separate, totally independent from each other institutions. They have different nature, structure, powers, responsibilities. And as it is well known, and that is what happens in every criminal justice system, domestically or internationally, the driving force is always the prosecution. So the Specialist Prosecutor's Office is not an exception in this regard, and it is for the Specialist Prosecutor that has the authority, the only organ that has the authority to investigate, to prosecute, and to decide against whom the prosecutor's office is going to press charges. So the specialist chambers have no role to play in this. And we have only the responsibility, which is quite different from that of the specialist prosecutor, to adjudicate what is presented to us and to decide on the basis of the assessment whether the prosecutor's charges have been supported by strong evidence, on that basis to make our determination whether to convict or to acquit those brought to account. With this in mind, these principal differences between our two institutions, I will respond to your question, specific question, that it was the independent decision of the specialist prosecutor to bring those charges against those accused in the cases that are currently before the specialist chambers. And the charges have, as we all know, has been already confirmed by the pretrial judge, and the defendants has the right to file a lot of submissions, including challenges related to the jurisdiction of the Kosovo Specialist Chambers. Now there is a challenge to the jurisdiction of the Kosovo Specialist Chambers that has been filed by the defense of Mr. Thaçi, and it is pending before the pretrial judge. Of course, we have to wait for the pretrial judge to take his decision. And he's the only authority that could pronounce on the matter. It is not for me or for anyone else to intervene into this decision making, and we cannot have an opinion even on this, because the judge is going to do this totally independently, impartially, fairly, and we're going to wait to see his judgment.
Ka pasur spekulime për një lloj lidhje midis kohës së ngritjes së aktakuzave dhe zhvillimeve politike në Kosovë. Sa imune janë dhomat e specializuara kur bëhet fjalë për ndikimin politik?
I have already explained the difference between our two institutions, independent institutions, and it is for the Specialist Prosecutor's Office not only to decide whom to charge and for what crimes, but also when to file an indictment. The second part of your question is related to the political influence. I must strongly underline that the Kosovo Specialist Chambers is free from any political influence and interference. Here, it is very important also to highlight, to underline that the independence of judges is a fundamental principle of the judicial profession. It is reflected in all international and regional instruments related to the judiciary, as it is also reflected in the solemn declaration that we as judges of the Kosovo Specialist Chambers make before taking office. This declaration is of essential importance to every one of us. It means a lot to every single judge, and it informs us in every step that we undertake in our daily judicial work. We, the judges of the Specialist Chambers, perform our duties as the law dictates, independently, impartially, and with full respect for the universal standards associated with the standing of judges. Judges are dependent, but they're dependent only on the law and the evidence presented in the case by the parties. And it is an equally important point that the independence of judges is an indispensable precondition to the delivery of justice. Without independent judges, justice cannot be delivered. I will finish my response to this question that the highest caliber of judges that are on the roster of judges of the Kosovo Specialist Chambers and their proven integrity throughout their professional experience makes me absolutely confident that people will be convinced that the Specialist Chambers dispense justice independently, free of any interference in the course of the fair, impartial, independent proceedings in a safe and secure environment. And I'm sure that those who are following our proceedings, those people already are becoming convinced about our full independence and commitment to justice, and this will come in the future proceedings.
Dhomat e specializuara merren vetëm me krime të pretenduara të kryera nga ish anëtarët e UÇK-s. Ka njerëz që thonë se ajo po shënjestron vetëm njërën palë. Çfarë thot gjykata?
This is a question which is frequently addressed to us. Having explained already the difference about our two independent institutions, I would like to clarify the following points. First, the decision whom to charge has been taken by the specialist prosecutor, and if there would be future cases, it will be the same with regard to anyone else whom the prosecutor will decide to bring to account. His office is the driving force, and we judges, having been seized with the case of the prosecutor, we are going to adjudicate only what is brought before us. Second, and this is as a matter of principle my point, that the decision of any prosecutor depends on whom to charge for what crimes, depends on the evidence that is available as a result of the investigation. So that I believe is the case also with the specialist prosecutor. And third, it is very important to recall that the specialist chambers is only concerned with the criminal responsibility of individuals for crimes that they allegedly committed, and this is regardless of the organization to which they belong and the cause that this organization pursues. The Kosovo Specialist Chambers does not deal, I have to underline this, and I have on a number of occasions highlighted that we do not deal with responsibility of groups, ethnicities, organizations. This principle is firmly reflected in our law, the law on specialist chambers and specialist prosecutor's office, and we are very respectful about the law. And the law dictates that in Article 16 that we deal with individual criminal responsibility. And this is equally reflected in the indictments that has been confirmed by the pretrial judge. I would advise Ms. Karabaku that people who are interested in our performance, in our operation, they themselves read the indictments and they will see that no one, in this case, the specialist prosecutor, and the confirmation of the pretrial judge is not related to organization, ethnicity, group, any other entity, but to individuals. So it is now up to us, the judges, when we have been already seized by the specialist prosecutor, to deal with the individual cases and to, based on the assessment of the evidence, to decide whether the charges of the prosecutor has been proven beyond reasonable doubt. And of course, that is the decision that is going to be made in the course of the proceedings, after the pretrial stage, then the trial stage, if the judgment of the trial panel will be appealed by the appeals chamber, but in the course of fair, independent, impartial proceedings in a safe and secure way.
Mandati I dhomave të specializuara është që të hetojë dhe ndjek penalisht krimet e kryera në Kosovë nga qytetarët e Kosovës dhe ish RFJ-s. A do të thotë kjo se ata do të ndjekin penalisht sipas mandatit krime të kryera në territorin e Kosovës nga njësitë ushtarake, para-ushtarake ose policore serbe?
I do not intend to be repetitive, and I wouldn't like to be repetitive, but still I have to remind the clarification that I made at the beginning, that it is the sole competence and responsibility of the specialist prosecutor to decide how to investigate, whom to investigate, what charges to bring. We, the judges of the specialist chambers, as any other judge in any democratic legal system, we do not and we should not determine against whom charges should be brought. Because no one then should believe us that we are going to impartially take the final decision on the merits of the case. The mandate of the judges is, as I said, to decide only on what has been brought to the desk of the bench. And people will see justice delivered by the specialist chambers to those brought to account and to victims of the crimes allegedly committed during the conflict and in the aftermath of the conflict in Kosovo.
Dëshmitarët janë kaq të rëndësishëm në trajtimin e krimeve të pretenduara të kryera dekada më parë. Si ka arritur gjykata të vendosë një program të tërë për mbrojtjen e dëshmitarëve?
Although witnesses are not the only source of evidence to inform the decision of judges, their testimonies are still very important piece of evidence, irrespective of the time that has passed since the commission of the crimes. In regard of the protection of witnesses, and more broadly, everyone who has cooperated with us, I would like to emphasize that their safety and security is of highest priority to the specialist chambers. Even the best judgment cannot be taken at the expense of the life and well-being of people. These are pivotal, absolute values that cannot be sacrificed. And this firm understanding of the Kosovo Specialist Chambers underpin our strong witness protection policy. To this end, we have, and I shall refer to a specialized unit within the registry that deals with the witness protection and support to ensure the safety and well-being of witnesses before, during, and after the trial. Judges also can order protective measures for witnesses, such as hearing some witnesses in closed session, also providing pseudonyms and using voice and face distortion. Witnesses can also testify via video link. I have to also remind that violations and breaches of court-ordered protective measures are offences against the administration of justice and are severely punished by the Criminal Code of Kosovo that is applicable before the specialist chambers when the law on Kosovo Specialist Chambers and Specialist Prosecutor's Office makes specific reference to these provisions of the Kosovo Criminal Code.
Është e qartë që Dhomat e specializuara kanë bashkëpunuar me autoritetet serbe për të mbledhur prova dhe për të pyetur dëshmitar. Sa të besueshme do të ishin provat që vijnë nga Serbia?
With regard to this question, of course, the answer is embedded into this principal difference between specialist chambers and specialist prosecutor's office. Being the president of the Kosovo Specialist Chambers, I am in no position to know how the specialist prosecutor conducted his investigations, what were the sources of his evidence, whether he entered into any agreements, with whom, what was the content of these agreements, just because these are powers that fall solely within the Office of the Specialist Prosecutor, and that is his independent policy and approach to how best to investigate his cases. As I said, and I will repeat again, it is not for me and it is not for the judges to have, we should not have any such knowledge, let alone involvement. At this point, however, I would like to inform your audience that the law on specialist chambers and specialist prosecutor's office gives us the opportunity to enter into agreements and for the purpose of fulfilling our mandate. When the judges are going to receive the evidence, and the cases of the prosecutor supported by this evidence, then we are going to start dealing with the cases, in particular the very, very complicated, very sophisticated masterpiece work to deal with evidence. Then we are going to assess the admissibility of evidence, to decide also on the weight to be given to each piece of evidence. Our rules of procedure and evidence, this is the procedural law that is an equivalent to a criminal procedure code in any domestic system, provides a very thorough regulation of best judicial practices related to how best to handle evidence. And I'm certain that the judges of the Kosovo Specialist Chambers are going to conduct a most meticulous and highly professional evaluation of every single piece of evidence, including those from Serbia, if there would be such piece of evidence provided by the prosecutor. But that is his sole, independent, exclusive decision to make.
Çfarë lloj bashkëpunimi ka pasur ose ka me Shqipërinë dhe autoritetet shqiptare? A ka juridiksion për të hetuar në Shqipëri? A ka marrë në pyetje shtetas shqiptar në lidhje me krimet e pretenduara? A ka autoritet për të bërë arrestime të shtetasve shqiptar?
My answer to your question will start with I don't have any knowledge about any agreements that the specialist prosecutor might have signed with states, organizations, other entities. But in this regard, it is very important to remind that the law upon which we function in Article 4 and Article 55 empowers the specialist chambers, the registrar, and the specialist prosecutor's office to enter into agreements and also to request the assistance and cooperation from states, organizations, other entities that are necessary for the fulfillment of our mandate, that are necessary for the investigation, prosecution of persons accused of committing crimes that fall under our jurisdiction. And these very important provisions that I was referring to have further been developed in our rules of procedure and evidence, but based on what the law empowers the specialist chambers, the registry, and the specialist prosecutor's office.
Çfarë lloj bashkëpunimi ka pasur me Maqedoninë e Veriut? A ka në listat e saj qytetarë të Maqedonisë së Veriut?
I may be repetitive with regard to this question as well, but I will refer to the response that I gave with regard to your previous question. Now, your question is related to any cooperation agreements with North Macedonia. I'm not in a position to speculate whether the prosecutor entered into some cooperation agreements, whether he sought such. This is really an arrangement that should be made by the Office of the Prosecutor for the purposes of his investigation and prosecution. When it comes to some needs related to the proper fulfillment of the mandate of the Kosovo Specialist Chambers, then of course let us see what we are going to undertake, of course based on the law that empowers us to make arrangements and to request assistance, cooperation, to enter into such agreements. But the time has not come for this with the chambers.
A do të shohim më shumë arrestime në javët e ardhshme? Kur planifikohet të përfundojë seria e arrestimeve dhe të shkohet në gjykime më në fund?
My response to your question will be the following. Whether there will be further arrests will depend again on the driving force in these proceedings, the Specialist Prosecutor's Office, and of course the pretrial judge who, if seized by the prosecutor with a request for the issuance of an arrest warrant, has to take a decision. So it will be up to both of them to see how proceedings are going to unfold. With regard to the second part of your question, when the actual trial proceedings will commence, again, the law dictates that it will be a decision of the pretrial judge, and the pretrial judge has to conduct, has to be involved in the preparation of the trial, and it will be up to the pretrial judge to decide at one point when the case is ready to go to trial and to commence the actual trial proceedings to be conducted by the trial panel. So far, the pretrial judge also made already made a pronouncement in the case of Mr. Mustafa that in his assessment, having resolved some outstanding matters, the transmission of the case to trial is expected to take place on or around the 7th of May. In the so-called contempt case, in the case of the prosecutor against Mr. Gutsati and Mr. Haradinaj, the pretrial judge set the 30th of June of this year as the day when he's going to notify me as president of the Specialist Chambers that he intends to send the case to trial, and only then I'm going to take a decision about the composition of the trial panel. About the case of the prosecutor against Mr. Taci and his co-accused, the pretrial judge has not taken a decision yet, so we have to wait for him to decide when the case will be prepared by the pretrial judge and his team and to be sent ready to kick off trial proceedings.
Në fund të ditës, dhomat e specializuara janë themeluar në emër të drejtësisë. A do të sjellin drejtësi për të gjithë?
I have to say, Ms. Karadaku, that I'm very much content with this question. Indeed, the Specialist Chambers has been established in the name of justice. I have to speak about myself that if, upon reading of the relevant normative documents, I would not have been convinced about the ultimate genuine goal to dispense justice of the Kosovo Specialist Chambers and the intentions of the founders of this institution, I personally wouldn't have joined the Specialist Chambers. We, the judges of the Specialist Chambers, and I speak on behalf of all colleagues, are serious professionals who are not going to compromise our reputation that we have established throughout all our professional career by being part of anything else but a legitimate judicial institution. The law on Specialist Chambers and Specialist Prosecutor's Office is instructive in this regard, that this institution is going to deliver justice to anyone concerned. The mandate that is reflected in our law is to ensure secure, independent, impartial, fair, and efficient proceedings, criminal proceedings, and each and every one of these elements of the proceedings before the specialist chambers has further been developed in other normative documents of our institution, namely the Rules of Procedure and Evidence, and also the Code of Judicial Ethics for Judges. And I would like shortly to address all of these elements. First, the specialist chambers must provide everyone with the highest standards of protection and safeguard for their lives and well-being. This is the security of our proceedings. Then the specialist chambers should be, and I'm certain we will be, free of any interference, whether political, from states, from organizations, or individuals. Then the treatment, equal treatment of both parties is very important, and the impartiality of the judges dealing with the cases of the two parties. And also it is vital to underline that the accused are guaranteed a fair trial in which their rights are going to be upheld and protected. These are fundamental rights that are reflected in Article 21 of the law, and they also reflect the human rights conventions which the Kosovo Specialist Chambers adheres to by virtue of the Constitution of the Republic of Kosovo. In order for justice to be served, it is also essential that victims be not forgotten. What is very special about the legal framework within which we operate, that the victims who have suffered personal harm as a result of the crimes committed and that are on the list of crimes in the indictment as confirmed by the pretrial judge have the right to apply and to participate as victims, of course, through a victims' council. All this gives me the confidence to say, as president of the Kosovo Specialist Chambers, that the Specialist Chambers will serve justice to everyone through ensuring that our decisions are reflective of totally independent, fully impartial, fair, expeditious judicial proceedings, and I hope that in our next meeting we both are going to agree that what I affirm to you and stand behind strongly is going to be accepted as an obvious fact by every single person who is interested in what we do and how we operate. Thank you very much for your time.